The year is 1243. Eastern Anatolia, a mountain pass called Kosada, a place whose name will echo through the centuries. 30,000 Mongol horsemen sit completely motionless on their mounts, an eerie stillness that unnerves their enemies, watching as 60,000 Seljuk warriors march steadily toward them across the dusty plain below. The heat is oppressive, the kind that makes armor feel like an oven. The sound of marching feet echoes through the mountains like distant thunder, a sound that seems to shake the very earth beneath them. The dust rises in clouds behind the advancing army, visible for miles across the landscape. The Seljuks have brought everyone they could possibly muster from across their vast empire, calling in every favor, every alliance, every debt owed over decades. Byzantine mercenaries with their heavy armor glinting in the afternoon sun, their shields emblazoned with crosses and imperial eagles that speak of former glory. Georgian cavalry renowned throughout the region for their devastating charges and fearlessness in battle. Men who've been fighting since childhood and know nothing else. Frankish knights who've stayed in the East after the Crusades seeking fortune and glory in foreign lands. Their armor different from anything the East has seen before. Troops from half a dozen allied kingdoms scattered across the region who owe fealty to the Sultan and have come to honor their oaths and obligations despite the danger. This is the biggest army Anatolia has seen in generations, perhaps the largest military force assembled in this land in living memory, certainly the largest since the great Seljuk victories decades earlier, when they dominated the region. They outnumber the Mongols 2-1. The numbers are clearly, overwhelmingly on their side. Any reasonable calculation would say the Seljuks should win this battle decisively and send the invaders fleeing. The Seljuk Sultan Kayhusrah II is confident, supremely so, radiating certainty as he surveys his massive army spread out across the valley below his position. Why wouldn't he be confident? Everything in his experience tells him this should be a straightforward victory over these barbarians from the steppes. His empire controls the vital trade routes that connect east and west, bringing wealth from China and India to Europe, goods that pass through his territory, generating massive customs revenues that fill his treasury, the profitable ports along the Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts where ships from across the known world dock and unload exotic goods from distant lands, and the wealthy cities that have prospered under Seljuk rule for decades, cities that gleam with prosperity and architectural achievement. His armies have crushed the crusaders who dared challenge his power in battle after battle across the region, sending them fleeing back to Europe in defeat and humiliation, broken and scattered. His treasury is overflowing with gold and silver from taxation and trade, wealth beyond imagination that allows him to hire the best mercenaries available from across the known world and equip the finest warriors with the best weapons and armor money can buy, swords forged in Damascus and mail from Europe. These Mongol invaders are just another problem to solve, another threat to be eliminated and forgotten, like so many before them who challenged Seljuk power and paid the price. He has absolutely no idea he's about to make the worst military decision in his empire's entire history, a mistake that will echo through the centuries and reshape the world in ways he cannot possibly imagine in his worst nightmares. What happens in the next few hours won't just destroy the Seljuk Sultanate as a political entity and military power that matters in regional politics. It will accidentally trigger a chain reaction that creates the Ottoman Empire, an empire that will last 600 years, longer than almost any empire in human history except perhaps Rome and China, conquer 3 continents spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa, controlling territory from the gates of Vienna to the Arabian Peninsula, from the Crimea to Yemen, and reshape the entire world in ways the Mongols never imagined possible or intended in their wildest dreams or planning sessions. The Mongols think they're here to collect tribute and move on to their next conquest in their endless expansion across the known world, just another stop on their campaign of subjugation that has taken them from China to Eastern Europe. They don't know they're about to become the midwives of one of history's greatest empires, the architects of something far beyond their intentions or comprehension, something that will outlast their own empire by centuries and shape the modern Middle East and Eastern Europe in fundamental ways that persist today. This is the story of the most spectacular unintended consequence in medieval history, perhaps in all of human history, if you really think about the scale and duration of what happened. A story of destruction and creation intertwined in ways no one could predict or plan, of how chaos gives birth to order in unexpected ways, of how one empire's collapse can inadvertently give rise to another even more powerful and enduring than what came before, like a phoenix rising from ashes, but even more dramatic, of how the Mongols, the greatest conquerors the world had ever seen up to that point, who built the largest land empire in human history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, covering more territory than any empire before or since, planted the seeds of the Ottomans without firing a single arrow in that direction, without any conscious plan or design or awareness of what they were creating through their destruction. And it all starts right here, right now, on this mountain pass with a battle that will change absolutely everything about the political landscape of the medieval world and set in motion events that will still be felt today in the borders and conflicts of the modern Middle East and the Balkans. If you think you know how the Ottoman Empire was born, you're probably wrong. The textbooks give you a simple, clean story that makes sense in hindsight, a narrative arc that seems inevitable. They tell you the Ottomans rose naturally to fill a power vacuum, as if it was destiny. The real story is so much stranger, more complicated, and more fascinating than what the sanitized histories tell you in school, more random and chaotic and dependent on 1,000 small decisions. Let me show you what really happened, the messy reality behind the clean narratives we're taught, the human drama and accident and chaos that actually drives history forward, rather than the neat cause and effect chains historians like to construct after the fact to make sense of things. Let's rewind the clock a bit and set the stage properly so you understand what's at stake and what the world looked like before everything changed forever. The 1200s. Anatolia, what we now call modern Turkey, the land bridge between Europe and Asia that every conqueror has to cross if they want to move between continents, is dominated by the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. And when I say dominated, I mean completely dominated. They're powerful, sophisticated, incredibly wealthy beyond measure, one of the great powers of the medieval world that can stand alongside the Mamluks and the Byzantines as equals. They control the essential trade routes that connect the Mediterranean world to the riches of Asia and the Far East, the Silk Road passages that bring exotic goods from China, spices that are worth their weight in gold, silk that European nobility would bankrupt themselves to obtain, precious stones that adorn the crowns of kings. Think about the geography for a moment. Anatolia is the crossroads of the world. Merchants from Venice and Genoa meet traders from Baghdad and Samarkand. Goods flow both ways. Chinese porcelain heads west, European wool heads east, and the Seljuks take their cut from all of it, growing rich beyond imagination. They've got the ports that facilitate commerce across vast distances, bringing in goods from across the known world, spices from India that are worth their weight in gold and make fortunes for merchants, silk from China that the European nobility craves and pays enormous sums to acquire, slaves from the steppes who are sold in markets and shipped across the Mediterranean to work in fields and households. They're minting their own coins that are accepted across the region as stable currency and used in trade from Egypt to Persia, a sign of economic power and stability that merchants trust, and building mosques that still stand today as testaments to their architectural brilliance and religious devotion. Structures that inspire awe even now, almost 1,000 years later, with their intricate tilework and soaring domes that seem to defy gravity. The Byzantine Empire clings desperately to the western edges of Anatolia around Constantinople, the once great empire now reduced to a shadow of its former glory after centuries of decline. But everyone who matters knows the Seljuks are the real power here, the dominant force in the region that actually matters and controls the wealth and the armies that can project power. But this delicate balance of power is about to shift dramatically and violently in ways no one can imagine or prepare for, in ways that will redraw the map of the entire region and change the course of world history. Then the storm arrives from the east, unstoppable and terrifying, a force of nature made of men and horses, the Mongols. And let me tell you, when the Mongols arrive, they don't arrive quietly. They arrive like a hurricane, destroying everything in their path. The Mongols aren't coming to negotiate terms or establish diplomatic relations through marriage alliances and treaties like civilized kingdoms, do according to established customs that have governed international relations for centuries. They don't do diplomacy in the traditional sense that civilized kingdoms understand or practice. They don't send ambassadors with gifts and flowery letters promising friendship and alliance. Genghis Khan is dead by this point, having died in 1227 while campaigning in China, but his legacy is very much alive and expanding rapidly under his sons and grandsons, who are equally ruthless and ambitious, if perhaps not quite as brilliant as the founder. His successors have a simple policy: submit or die. There's no third option, no negotiation, no compromise. You acknowledge Mongol supremacy and pay tribute, or you cease to exist. They've destroyed kingdoms that thought they were too powerful to fall. They've massacred entire cities to make examples, and they're coming to Anatolia with the same playbook that's worked everywhere, from China to Eastern Europe. His successors are carving through Persia with brutal efficiency, destroying ancient cities that have stood for millennia and contain libraries and centers of learning accumulated over generations. Through the Caucasus Mountains, where no army has ever successfully campaigned before, because of the difficult terrain and fierce local resistance from mountain tribes, through everything and everyone that stands in their path of conquest. Cities burn, entire populations are massacred or enslaved according to Mongol policy. Resistance is crushed without mercy or hesitation. In 1242, they took Erzurum, a major Seljuk city that was thought to be impregnable behind its massive walls that had withstood numerous sieges, walls that had stood for centuries and seemed eternal. They're not subtle about their methods at all, or concerned with minimizing casualties or winning hearts and minds through gentle treatment. 2 months of relentless siege warfare with constant bombardment from siege engines and catapults that the Mongols learned to use from Chinese engineers they captured. When the city finally falls, exhausted and starving, after eating the dogs and rats and leather from their shields and boots, they make a brutal example of it to send a message to anyone considering resistance anywhere in the region. Bodies pile up in the streets like cordwood, the smell of death hanging over the ruins for weeks. Buildings burn for days, smoke visible for miles across the countryside, like a pillar of darkness announcing the city's fate. Survivors are enslaved or killed, their fate depending on their usefulness to the conquerors and whether they have skills the Mongols need. The Seljuk Sultan Kaikhusraw gets the message loud and clear, echoing across his empire through fleeing refugees who bring tales of horror. This is different from anything he's faced before in his life, different from border raids or dynastic disputes or conflicts with the Crusaders. This isn't a border skirmish or a dispute over territory that can be negotiated at a conference table. This is existential, a threat to the very existence of his empire and civilization and way of life. He gathers everyone he can possibly muster from every corner of his realm, calling in every favor and debt accumulated over decades of rule, promising rewards and land to those who come to his aid. Allies from Trebizond on the Black Sea coast, who bring their own contingents of warriors trained in mountain warfare, mercenaries from Europe looking for pay and plunder and adventure in the East, men who've heard stories of Eastern wealth, troops from Aleppo in Syria who march north for weeks to join the gathering host, enduring the summer heat and running short of water. He marches out with maybe 60,000 men, possibly more depending on which chronicler you believe and which sources you trust as reliable. Since medieval numbers are always uncertain, the biggest army Anatolia has seen in decades, an impressive show of force meant to intimidate the invaders and demonstrate Seljuk power and wealth, and the Sultan's ability to mobilize resources. June 1243, Kosada, the mountain pass between Sivas and Erzincan, where the terrain favors neither side particularly, relatively open ground without the narrow defiles that might favor defenders. The two armies face each other across the valley, sizing each other up, both sides trying to read the other's intentions and looking for weaknesses. The Seljuks in their organized formations that they've drilled for months, rigid lines of infantry with cavalry on the flanks according to traditional tactics, the Mongols in their loose clusters that seem chaotic, but are actually carefully coordinated based on decades of experience fighting across Asia. The battle is absolute chaos from the start. Nothing like the orderly warfare the Seljuks are used to, where armies line up and charge in organized formations according to established rules of warfare. The Mongols do what they always do with devastating effectiveness, honed over decades of conquest across Asia and Europe, tactics they've perfected through constant warfare, feigned retreats to draw the enemy out of formation, making them think they're winning when they're actually being lured into a trap that will close around them like jaws, arrows falling like deadly rain from every direction, creating confusion and panic among soldiers who've never faced such coordinated archery and mobility. Sudden charges that shatter rigid formations before they can respond or reorganize their lines to meet the new threat. The Seljuk army doesn't just lose the battle, it disintegrates completely, melts away like snow in summer sun under the Mongol onslaught. The Sultan flees in disgrace all the way to Antalya on the southern coast, abandoning his army to save his own life, while his soldiers are cut down by the thousands. His empire will never recover from this catastrophic defeat, never regain its former power, or prestige, or respect from neighboring states. Here's what you need to understand about Mongol strategy and how they operated across their empire from China to Persia to Eastern Europe. The Mongols didn't come to destroy the Seljuks completely and eliminate them from history, like they'd done to some kingdoms that resisted too fiercely and made examples of, cities where they killed every living thing down to the cats and dogs. They came to subjugate them, make them vassals paying regular tribute year after year that would fund further Mongol expansion across the known world, extract wealth to fund their ongoing conquests elsewhere in China and Central Asia. And that's exactly what they did with clinical efficiency and ruthless pragmatism honed over decades of building an empire. 12 million silver coins a year, an astronomical sum that drains the treasury and leaves the Seljuk state unable to maintain its armies properly. 500 bolts of the finest silk that takes months to produce and represents countless hours of labor. 500 camels for transport and war. 5,000 sheep for food to feed Mongol armies as they campaign. Every single year without fail, the tribute had to be paid to the Mongol overlords or face destruction, and the massacre of entire cities as examples to others. The Seljuks kept their sultan as a figurehead, with no real power to make decisions independently or conduct foreign policy. Kept their cities nominally under their control, but watched carefully by Mongol administrators, who report everything back to the Ilkhanate capital, kept the appearance of power and sovereignty for the watching world and their own people who need to believe in stability and continuity. But the reality was stark and unmistakable. To everyone who understood politics and power and how the world actually works beneath the surface, they were finished as an independent power with agency. The empire was a hollow shell going through the motions, pretending to still matter when everyone knew better and could see the truth. This is where it gets really interesting, where the unintended consequences start to unfold in ways no one could predict or imagine at the time. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into how empires actually work in practice, not the sanitized textbook version where everything is simple and clean and follows logical patterns that make sense in retrospect, but the messy reality of power politics and human ambition and accident and chaos and the randomness of events, hit that subscribe button, because this channel is all about the moments history books gloss over to make a neat narrative that fits on one page, the details that make the story real and human and understandable, the accidents and mistakes that change everything and redirect the course of civilizations. The Mongols set up the Ilkhanate to rule Persia and Anatolia as part of their vast empire, stretching across Asia from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, one of 4 major divisions of the Mongol Empire. They install governors to manage daily affairs and collect taxes and maintain order in the cities and ensure compliance. They demand tribute with absolute regularity on pain of death and destruction of entire populations, as they demonstrated numerous times. They garrison troops in strategic locations to maintain control and quickly suppress any rebellion or resistance that might emerge. But here's the thing about the Mongols that's crucial to understand their limitations as empire builders, despite their military brilliance and tactical genius. They're nomads at heart, steppe warriors who grew up in tents and on horseback, living a mobile life following their herds. They're absolutely brilliant at conquering territories and defeating armies in open battle through superior tactics and mobility and coordination honed over generations. They're not great at administering settled civilizations over the long term, at managing cities and farms and trade and all the boring details of governance that keep a complex society functioning. They don't want to micromanage every little Turkish principality scattered across Anatolia, dealing with local disputes and grievances and ethnic tensions that they don't fully understand. They just want the money flowing smoothly into their coffers so they can fund more conquests and maintain their armies and live in luxury befitting conquerors of the world. So the Seljuk Sultanate becomes a puppet state, a shadow of its former glory and power, going through the motions of governance without real authority. And like all puppet states throughout history from ancient times to today, it's weak and unstable, lacking legitimacy in the eyes of its own people who see through the fiction of independence. It's divided internally by competing factions vying for what little power remains, fighting over scraps like dogs. The Sultan's sons start fighting each other for scraps of power and control over provinces, civil war brewing beneath the surface. The Mongol overseers play favorites to maintain control and extract more wealth and prevent any unified opposition from forming that might challenge their rule. The whole system is corrupt, extractive, and nobody's actually in charge with real authority that people respect and follow willingly. By 1278, just 35 years after the battle at Kusada, the Seljuk state was barely functioning as a coherent entity capable of governing or maintaining order in its territories or collecting taxes. By 1307, it's gone completely, totally dissolved into nothing, erased from the map as if it never existed, remembered only in chronicles and the occasional reference in documents. What's left in its place across Anatolia in the power vacuum created by the collapse? Dozens of small Turkish principalities, beyliks, scattered across Anatolia like shrapnel from an explosion, each competing with the others for territory and resources and dominance. Each one led by a warlord, a tribal chief, a strong man who can attract warriors to his banner and promise loot and glory and land and adventure to young men seeking their fortune. The Ilkhanate technically rules them all as overlord, claiming sovereignty over the entire region on paper and in their official documents and diplomatic correspondence. Every beylik mints coins with the Mongol Khan's face on them as a sign of submission and acknowledgement of overlordship, a ritual that everyone goes through to maintain the fiction. Nobody dares challenge that openly, at least not yet. Not while the Mongols are strong and capable of crushing rebellion with overwhelming force brought from across their empire. Their empire, but in practice it's complete chaos and confusion, a free-for-all where might makes right and the strongest survive. Fragmented authority with no central power, capable of enforcing order or resolving disputes between competing claims, tribal politics based on personal loyalty rather than institutions or laws or established procedures, religious leaders gathering followers with promises of divine favor and paradise in the afterlife to those who fight for the faith. The warriors are constantly switching allegiances based on who's paying better this month, or offering better opportunities for plunder and advancement and glory, loyalty flowing to the highest bidder without shame. And here's what the Mongols completely missed in their calculations, what they failed to see because they were focused on immediate tribute and short-term gains, rather than long-term stability. They'd created the perfect conditions for something entirely new to emerge from the wreckage of their conquest, a power vacuum waiting to be filled by someone ambitious and capable enough to seize the moment without hesitation. Northwestern Anatolia, the frontier region where civilizations meet and clash violently, the borderland. Byzantine territory to the west, which fell apart after the Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204 in one of history's great betrayals of fellow Christians for profit and greed, leaving it weak and divided among squabbling nobles, fighting over scraps of the former empire like vultures. Mongol-controlled Turkish beyliks to the east, paying tribute, but essentially autonomous in daily matters as long as the money flows to Persia regularly and nobody causes trouble. And in between these two worlds, in a small town called Sout, that nobody's heard of outside the immediate region, there's this guy named Osman. We don't know much about him that's historically certain or verified by multiple independent sources that historians can trust and cite with confidence. The sources are contradictory, written generations later by chroniclers with their own agendas and loyalties, and political masters who want certain stories told to glorify the dynasty, full of legends and embellishments meant to glorify the Ottoman dynasty and justify their rule as divinely ordained and inevitable. Maybe his father was Ertugrul, a tribal chief who served the Seljuks loyally before the collapse, and was rewarded with land on the frontier as payment for services. Maybe he fought for the Mongols as a vassal warrior in their campaigns against the Byzantines and their other enemies. Maybe both at different times as circumstances changed and opportunities arose, and he played both sides skillfully. The origin story is murky and contested by scholars to this day, with no definitive answer that everyone accepts, each generation reinterpreting the sources. Around 1299, something significant happens that changes everything for this small beylik that nobody's paying attention to at the time. Osman stops minting coins with the Mongol Ilkhan's name on them, as all the other beyliks do as a matter of course to acknowledge overlordship. He mints them with his own name instead, a bold declaration of independence that could get him killed if the Mongols notice and decide to make an example of him. Now you have to understand what a big deal this is. In the medieval world, coinage isn't just money. It's a political statement. It's a declaration of sovereignty. Every time someone uses your coin, they're acknowledging your authority. For 2 centuries, every Turkish ruler in Anatolia had the Mongol Khan's face on their coins. It was just how things were done. You didn't question it any more than you questioned the sun rising in the east. But Osman looked at that tradition and said, "Not for me." That's huge, more significant than it might seem to us today, when we barely use coins and don't think about their political symbolism or what they represent in terms of power. That's a declaration of independence in the language of medieval power that everyone understood immediately when they saw those coins in circulation at markets and bazaars. For 2 centuries, every Turkish ruler in Anatolia had acknowledged Mongol supremacy on their currency as a basic fact of political life, an unchangeable reality that nobody questioned or challenged openly. Osman just said, "Not anymore. I don't answer to you or anyone. I'm my own man, and I rule my own territory and make my own decisions without permission from anyone." Was he rebelling against the Mongols in warfare, with armies clashing on battlefields in dramatic fashion like the Seljuks had failed? Not exactly, not at first anyway. He was too smart for that and understood the limits of his power and resources. The Ilkhanate was weakening from internal conflicts and succession disputes between rival princes killing each other for power in brutal civil wars that drained resources. The Seljuks were gone entirely as a political force that mattered in regional politics or could maintain order or project power. Nobody was really watching the frontier anymore with any consistency or care, focused on more important matters closer to the center of power in Persia, where the real wealth and politics were. Osman saw a power vacuum opening up before his eyes and walked right into it with calculated boldness and ambition, seizing the moment without hesitation or fear of consequences that might never come. His beylik, the Ottoman beylik named after him, was small and insignificant really in the grand scheme of Anatolian politics, barely worth noticing on any map that mattered. The Karamanids to the south were much stronger with more resources and warriors and territory and wealth accumulated over decades of raiding and conquest. The Germanids had more territory under their control and more prestige and better connections to other powers in the region and longer pedigrees. But Osman had something they didn't possess, something invaluable that couldn't be bought with all the gold in the world or acquired through conquest or inherited from ancestors. And I cannot stress this enough. Location, location, location. It's the oldest rule in real estate, and it applies to empire building too. Osman's beylik is sitting in the sweet spot. He's sitting right on the Byzantine frontier, the contested borderland between 2 civilizations and 2 faiths, Islam and Christianity, where conflict is constant and opportunities abound for anyone smart enough to exploit them. Right next to weakened Christian cities ripe for conquest, with crumbling walls and demoralized garrisons who haven't been paid in months and are losing faith in their distant emperor. Right where warriors fleeing from Mongol-controlled territories are arriving constantly, looking for new opportunities and fresh starts away from oppression and heavy tribute that impoverishes them and their families and offers no future. These aren't just any warriors. These are experienced fighters, veterans of campaigns across Asia, men who know Mongol tactics inside and out because they fought for the Mongols. They bring knowledge, skills, and most importantly, they bring desperation. Desperate men fight harder. Desperate men are loyal to whoever gives them hope. And Osman is giving them hope. He's far enough from the Ilkhanate center of power in Persia that they don't care much about what he's doing on the distant frontier that barely matters to them strategically or economically in the grand scheme of their empire. Close enough to trade routes to matter economically and strategically for anyone who wants to build power and wealth through commerce and taxation and controlling the flow of goods. And he's smart, remarkably so for a frontier warlord, without formal education or training in statecraft or diplomacy or the arts of governance. He forges pragmatic alliances with Byzantine governors when it suits his interests, playing them off against each other skillfully and understanding their internal rivalries. He marries into local families, both Muslim and Christian, building a web of connections and obligations that tie communities together across religious lines in ways that strengthen his position. He welcomes warriors from other beyliks who are dissatisfied with their current situations and looking for better leadership and opportunities for advancement and rewards. Greeks, Armenians, Turks, converts from Christianity to Islam, it doesn't matter to him at all what their background is or where they came from or what language they speak. If you can fight effectively, you're in. You're part of the growing Ottoman enterprise and brotherhood, equal in the eyes of the leader regardless of origin or faith or ancestry. This isn't about ethnic purity or religious exclusivity, like some later empires that obsessed over bloodlines and ancestry and who your grandfather was. This is about building power through whatever means work practically, being pragmatic rather than ideological about recruitment and organization. And here's my take on this, and I'll be completely honest about my bias here as a historian who studied this period for years and read countless sources in multiple languages. Osman understood something the other beylik leaders didn't grasp at all. Something fundamental about how power works in times of chaos and transition. The Mongol destruction of the Seljuks hadn't just created chaos and instability and suffering across the land, hadn't just destroyed cities and killed thousands of people and disrupted trade. It had created an extraordinary opportunity for someone bold enough to seize it without hesitation or moral qualms about stepping over the old rules and traditions that no longer applied. The old order was gone forever, swept away by the Mongol invasion like a sandcastle before the tide, never to return. The rules had fundamentally changed in ways that opened new possibilities for ambitious men with vision and courage. You didn't need to be the strongest militarily or the richest economically anymore to build an empire from nothing, to create something lasting. You just needed to be in the right place at the right time and be ruthless enough to capitalize on the moment without hesitation or moral qualms, to see the opportunity and take it before anyone else did or understood what was possible. Now, the Mongols are still powerful in the 1300s, still a major force that armies fear across Asia and Europe, their reputation for brutality preceding them and terrifying their enemies. The Ilkhanate controls Persia and technically Anatolia as well, at least on paper, and in theory, according to their maps and official documents and treaties. But they're focused on their own internal succession crises, with princes killing each other for the throne in brutal civil wars that weaken the empire, on conflicts with the Mamluks in Egypt who've proven impossible to conquer despite repeated invasions and massive armies sent against them with the best commanders, on holding together their massive territories that are starting to fragment along ethnic lines and regional loyalties as local governors become more independent and stop sending tribute regularly, the Turkish beyliks, as long as the tribute keeps flowing regularly to the Ilkhanate capital without interruption or delays that might draw attention. Who cares what they do locally or how they govern or who they fight with each other in their petty wars? This indifference proves fatal to Mongol interests in the region, a strategic mistake they'll never recover from and will cost them everything they built. Osman conquers Bursa in 1326 after an 18-year siege, a testament to his patience and persistence and strategic vision, his willingness to wait for victory rather than seeking quick glory that might fail. His son Orhan makes it the new capital of their expanding state, building it into a proper city with mosques and markets and administrative buildings and walls that will protect it. They start expanding in all directions, testing boundaries and pushing limits, probing for weakness in their neighbors who are divided and distracted. Nicaea falls in 1331, Nicomedia in 1337, each victory bringing more territory and more wealth and more prestige. Each conquest brings more warriors, flocking to the Ottoman banner seeking glory and land and the chance to be part of something growing and successful, more resources to fund further expansion and better equipment for the armies, more legitimacy as a rising power that demands respect from neighbors and cannot be ignored anymore by anyone in the region. The Byzantines are too weak and divided to stop them effectively anymore, their empire a shadow of its former glory that once controlled the entire Mediterranean and could project power across continents. The other beyliks are too busy fighting each other over scraps and old grudges and territorial disputes that go back generations and consume their attention. And the Mongols, they barely notice what's happening on the distant frontier until it's far too late to do anything about it effectively, until the Ottomans are too strong to crush easily without a major campaign that would require resources they don't have. By 1354, a watershed moment arrives that changes everything about the Ottoman trajectory and transforms them from a regional beylik into something much larger, with continental ambitions and a vision that extends beyond Anatolia. The Ottomans crossed into Europe for the first time in force, not just raiding, but conquering and holding territory permanently, with garrisons and administrators. Gallipoli, a permanent foothold in the Balkans that will never be relinquished, a door kicked open to a new continent full of wealthy cities to conquer and rich lands to plunder and Christian kingdoms to subjugate. And here's what makes this moment so significant. Europe in the 1300s is wealthy but divided. The Balkans are a patchwork of competing kingdoms, principalities, and city-states, all fighting each other. The Byzantines are weak. The Bulgarians are in decline. The Serbians are strong but focused on their own expansion. Nobody is paying attention to this Turkish beylik crossing the straits. By the time they realize what's happening, the Ottomans have established themselves so firmly that they cannot be dislodged without a major, coordinated effort that these divided Christian states cannot organize. This tiny beylik that started in Sochut with maybe a few hundred warriors is becoming a major regional power that has to be taken seriously by everyone in the region, Christians and Muslims alike, a power that can no longer be dismissed or ignored by anyone who understands the shifting balance of power. And here's the kicker, the beautiful irony of history that makes you laugh at the unpredictability of it all and the blindness of empires to what's happening right under their noses. The Mongols are still nominally in charge of Anatolia, officially according to diplomatic fiction and old treaties that nobody's bothered to update or revisit. The Ilkhanate doesn't collapse entirely until 1335, maintaining the appearance of control and sending occasional demands for tribute that fewer and fewer beyliks actually pay. But by then, the damage is already done and irreversible. The horse has left the barn and is miles away, impossible to recapture or bring back under control, no matter what resources you throw at the problem. The fragmentation they created by destroying the Seljuks and not replacing them with effective governance or a new order that people respected. The power vacuum they left by not establishing effective direct rule and administration that people respected and followed. The warrior migration they triggered by making eastern Anatolia unsafe under heavy tribute that drove people west seeking better opportunities. It's all fed into this one beylik that's now unstoppable in its expansion and ambition, a snowball rolling downhill, gathering mass and speed with every passing year. In 1402, there's a beautiful historical irony that can't be ignored by anyone studying this period carefully and thinking about causes and effects and unintended consequences. The Mongol conqueror Timur, claiming to be restoring the legacy of Genghis Khan and his empire and claiming descent from him through his mother's line, invades Anatolia with a massive army of hundreds of thousands of warriors and crushes the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I at the Battle of Ankara. In a devastating defeat that nearly ends the Ottoman state entirely and breaks it apart into warring factions. The Mongols one last time are trying to reassert control over the region, to turn back the clock to earlier times when they ruled everything from China to Eastern Europe without challenge. But they can't hold it for long despite the victory on the battlefield and the capture of the Sultan himself, who dies in captivity. They leave, returning to their heartland in Central Asia to deal with their own problems and succession disputes that are tearing their empire apart. And the Ottomans rebuild stronger than before, learning from their mistakes and emerging more centralized and better organized and more resilient than they were before the catastrophe. By 1453, the ultimate achievement arrives that stuns the entire world and announces the Ottomans as a world power that cannot be ignored. The Ottomans took Constantinople, the city that had stood for over 1,000 years as the heir to Rome and center of Eastern Christianity, the greatest city in Christendom and seemingly impregnable behind its massive walls that had withstood countless sieges. The city the Mongols never conquered despite their vast empire and military prowess and numerous attempts and siege campaigns over decades. The Ottomans, the descendants of that tiny beylik that emerged from Mongol chaos and destruction on the frontier, succeed spectacularly where the Mongols failed completely, achieving what was thought impossible by using massive cannons that breach the ancient walls and turn them to rubble. So here's what happened: the chain of causation that created an empire from chaos and accident and decisions made for entirely different reasons. The Mongols crushed the Seljuks militarily to control Anatolia and extract wealth for their empire's expansion into new territories and fund their wars in China. That destruction fragmented the region into dozens of competing beyliks, fighting each other for resources and territory and prestige and survival. That fragmentation created mobility, with warriors moving west, steadily away from Mongol control, seeking better opportunities and freedom from oppressive tribute, and a chance to build something new. That mobility fed one particular beylik, sitting strategically on the Byzantine frontier, in the right location, at the right time, with the right leader who understood opportunity. That beylik became the Ottoman Empire, which lasted until 1922, when it finally collapsed after World War I, having survived for 6 centuries through countless challenges. 6 centuries of continuous rule over vast territories, spanning 3 continents from Budapest to Baghdad to Cairo, from the Crimea to Yemen, from Algeria to the Persian Gulf. The Mongols didn't plan any of this sequence of events or foresee these consequences in any way, shape, or form, had no idea what they were creating. They were extracting tribute and moving on to the next conquest in their endless expansion across continents, focused on immediate gains and short-term strategic goals and maintaining their empire. They had absolutely no idea they'd accidentally created the conditions for one of history's greatest empires to emerge from the ruins of their conquest, that they were planting seeds that would grow into something that would outlast them by centuries and reshape the world in fundamental ways. If you want the academic version from historians in universities writing papers and books and dissertations, they call this unintended consequences of imperial policy and use lots of jargon and theoretical frameworks. I call it the universe's sense of irony, showing itself in history, the chaos of human events that no one can fully control or predict, no matter how powerful they are. The Mongols built the largest contiguous land empire in human history, spanning continents from Pacific to Mediterranean, controlling more territory than any empire before or since, an achievement never matched in scale. They conquered everything from Korea in the east to Hungary in the west, more territory than Rome ever dreamed of controlling, crushing every army that stood against them. But the Ottoman Empire, the one they accidentally created through their actions and policies without any intention or awareness or plan, outlasted them all by centuries and left a deeper mark on the world we live in today, shaping modern borders and conflicts and the political geography of entire regions. And that's the thing about history that makes it endlessly fascinating to study and reflect on and analyze and try to understand deeply. Empires rise with great ambition and plans and strategies carefully laid out by brilliant minds, thinking they can control the future. Empires fall through decay or conquest or internal collapse when they lose their cohesion and purpose and the will to continue. But the really interesting part, the part that keeps me studying this obsessively and thinking about it and writing about it and discussing it with anyone who will listen, it's almost never the way anyone planned it at the beginning when they set out to build something that would last. Actions have consequences far beyond what anyone imagines at the time they're taken. Ripples spreading across centuries and affecting people who haven't even been born yet, and shaping the world in ways no one could foresee or imagine. If this story changed how you think about empire building and historical causation, and the role of accident and chaos in human affairs, and the limits of human planning, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because next week we're diving into another moment when history took a hard left turn and nobody saw it coming at all, another accident that changed everything about the world we live in today and shaped modern civilization. The Mongols created the Ottomans by destroying the Seljuks without ever intending to or even thinking about the consequences of what they were doing. Sometimes conquest plants the seeds of something even greater than what existed before, something the conquerors never imagined or wanted. Sometimes you create your own successor without even knowing it, without intending it at all, just through the chaos you leave behind and the power vacuum you create. That's history, messy, ironic, and absolutely fascinating in its unpredictability and human drama, and the way small decisions cascade into world-changing events that reshape continents and affect billions of people across generations and echo through the centuries.